Let me start this demonstration by explaining what it is that we've got going on here. First off, this is a standard tracker, the same that you'd find in the 1920s style. In terms of operation, it's the same tracking mechanism that you would find in the 1920s style player piano with a standard system, and also in all of the modern Aeolian products. This is referred to as a standard tracker, and even though the physical design of the mechanism changed when Aeolian went back into production in the 60s, the theory of operation is exactly the same as it was back in the 1920s. So all of this information will apply not only to the standard tracker in the 1920s vintage players, but also to all of the ones that were made between the early 60s and the mid 80s. What we've got going on here, I'm going to zoom in here a little bit, and we'll see that we've got these marked right here. So you can see that when this bellow collapses, it's going to make the music roll move to the right. When this bellow collapses, it's going to make the music roll move to the left. You'll also notice over here I've disconnected the link that normally goes between these two bellows, and normally the link would be just like where my fingers are right now, so that if one bellow moved, the other bellow moves. So normally they would move in coincidence like this. I've disconnected that link so that you can see more clearly when the vacuum is being applied to one bellow or the other. So there'll be no mistake as to which one is actually working, which bellow is actually working at what time. Up here we have the valve block, and as you'll see, these two nipples control this valve, these two nipples control this valve. These two sets of valves are completely independent from one another. Inside, if you were to look, you'd see that there's the only thing that's common between these two sets of valves is the main vacuum, which is applied via that hose back there. Everything else about these two sets of valves is completely independent. And then over here we have a simulated tracker bar, which I'll explain a little more in detail later as to why we have this simulated tracker bar set up here. But the holes are marked and they correspond with, that's where they're going to get connected. That's where these hoses are going to get connected. Okay. So where we're going to start is I'm going to apply vacuum. You see down here we have these. I'm going to use these to open and close these. Vacuum pump. I'll come over here, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to close all of these. And what we're doing here is we're simulating that all four of the holes on the tracker bar are closed. Now, if we were to open up this hole, as though the music paper has shifted and is now moving too far to the left or to the right, that would open up hole number 1. And when hole number 1 opens, this bellow has vacuum in it, and it is going to push the music roll to the left, bringing it back where it belongs. Hole number 4 is open, over on this side, indicating that the roll is shifted too far to the left. This bellow now has vacuum in it, and it is going to move the music roll back to the right, bringing it back into balance. If both of these holes are open, then the system is in a state of balance. There's no vacuum here. There's no vacuum here. Now, in that particular state, and this is important to note, that in this particular state where there's no vacuum to either one of these bellows, you would think that the music roll would just wander all over the place. But actually that's not possible, because also in the spool box on the left hand side, the chuck, the roll chuck on the left hand side is spring loaded, and because of the fact that it is spring loaded, it is always trying to push the music roll to the right, constantly trying to push the music roll to the right. And therefore it would constantly be trying to uncover hole number 2. So we'll see what happens if it uncovers hole number 2, and we can see that this bellow collapses and it pushes it back to the left. Conversely, if it goes too far to the left and hole number 3 opens up, this bellow collapses and it pushes it back to the right. Now, another point about this tracking system is the way that these valves work. If I close both of these valves, and this is the thing that a lot of technicians and owners and people who work with player pianos, and of course those who don't work with player pianos, find a little bit difficult sometimes to understand, is that when this valve is when these two ports are closed, you would think that the valve would be in the off position. And typically when a valve is in the off position, there's no vacuum being applied to the bellow. In other words, when you think about the music roll and what happens when the music roll is going across the tracker bar, as a perforation comes along and opens up a hole, that causes the valve to go into the on position, and when it goes into the on position, it applies vacuum to the bellow collapses, and that's what causes the note to play. However, these valves are arranged exactly opposite. In the standard tracker, when both of these holes are closed, vacuum is applied to the bellow, exactly the opposite of a normal valve. And then when the valve is activated, vacuum is taken out of the bellow, or atmosphere is allowed to go into the bellow. So we can activate and deactivate the bellow, or the valve, and in the off position, vacuum is applied, and in the on position, atmosphere is allowed to go in, or the valve is what you would refer to as off. The second valve, actually there's a pouch inside of this, which when you open up this port, it overcomes the action of the pouch, of this pouch. The pouch right here that operates this poppet is on the underside, down in here, and it pushes the valve up. But there's another pouch in here that this signal has to go through in order to get to this pouch, which activates this valve. And this pouch on number 3 is actually larger than the pouch that's underneath it, and I'll show you that in the diagram on an accompanying web page. So that when this is open, it actually overcomes the pressure that's being applied that allows the signal to go through, and it turns the valve back off. So in other words, this is in the off position with vacuum applied. When both of these are open, it's still in the off position with vacuum applied. All right. Now, let's presume that we're in a situation where, as I said before, these two holes are open, and as you can see, as we open or close these respectively, the roll would be shifting back and forth. Now, let's say that we have a narrow roll, and these holes are open all the time. These two are closed for the most part, and then they open up and they close, and that causes the roll to shift back and forth. But let's say that we have a music roll that's in good shape, and that it's covering all 4 of these holes. I want you to watch the operation of the bellows down there, and you see that with all 4 holes closed, both of the bellows have vacuum in them. You can see that now. Right now I've got them both. I've got the inside holes closed, there's no vacuum. Got the outside holes closed, there's vacuum. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pretend that a rip comes along on the on this side, on the what would amount to the right side of the music roll. A rip comes along on the right side of the music roll and opens both of these holes simultaneously. You notice that nothing happened. Same thing's true on the other side. If a rip were to come along on the left side of the music roll and both of those holes open simultaneously, nothing happens. In other words, it doesn't disturb the balance. So this is one of the beauties of the 4-hole tracking system, is that it actually allowed for defects in the music roll, such as a small rip or something like that, which otherwise, if it was just a 2-hole tracking system, and we're going to pretend that this is just a 2-hole tracking system, right? And we're going to say that they're playing along just fine, and the rip comes along, boom, rip. Well, now if a rip comes along now, it's only a 2-hole tracking system, it's going to react immediately. It's going to shift the music roll as though the roll had shifted. Even though the roll hasn't shifted, there's just a rip. It's going to see that rip as the roll moving, and it's going to react to it. And that's exactly what would happen in a 2-hole tracking system. A rip would come along, and that would cause the tracking mechanism to react and shift the roll, and now the roll is out of track, and it's going to have to go back in track as soon as the rip goes by, or as soon as the defect in the edge of the music roll goes by. Whereas with a 4-hole tracking system, if a defect on one side or the other were to come along, for the length of time that that defect is there, the tracking mechanism does not react to the change. So it's not going to be shifting the roll around, even though there's really nothing wrong with the roll, nothing wrong with the tracking other than the defect in the roll. So it ignores the defect, and that's my point, is that it will ignore the defect. Now that we've done that, and this is all theoretical, this is what I would refer to as theoretical, right? Because in reality, we can see that there's a slightly different situation going on here, and we'll address that momentarily. As you can see now, I've hooked up the hoses from the tracker bar simulator tracker bar to the valve assembly, and you notice that I put a couple of pieces of tape over the tracker holes to simulate a music roll. But what I want you to notice is that the hole, number one hole, is open only a very, very small amount. You probably can't see that, but it's less than a 32nd of an inch, probably about 25 thousandths of an inch. That hole is opened up, and yet, if you listen, well, you can see down here. You can see the bellow changing state. Even though the hole is only open that much. My point being is that this doesn't have to be open or closed 100% for this valve to work. It can be open even less than that, actually. I mean, it's kind of hard to do this. Trying to stay in frame here at the same time. Okay, it's only open that much. The valve is only open that much, and yet you can see that when I open and close it, it changes state. Why that's important is that so that you can see that even though that was only about 25 thousandths of an inch, 25 thousandths of an inch that these holes on the outside are open, if the paper were to move as little as that, I mean as little as 25 thousandths of an inch in one direction or another, you can see this bellow right here is operating. As little as 25 thousandths of an inch the paper moves in either direction, the tracker is going to respond to that change. This is important because when we get to the inside holes, and now I'm going to carefully move this tape so that the inside holes are open just as much as that outside hole. And you notice that the outside hole, you can't really see this very well, the outside hole is open about 50% at this point. I'll bring this up here. The outside hole is open about 50% at this point, and now the inside hole is open about 20 thousandths of an inch. And I'll do the same with the other one. And you notice that now, with the inside hole open, you see that this valve, I'm going to close it, it moves. And when I close this one, you have to take my word for it that I'm only covering the inside hole. Have a leak here in this tape. There we go. The point of this is that in real time, even though this valve is only open 50% on the top, number one, the valve is fully open. Same with number 4, it's fully open. And it only requires that same tiny amount of change between the inside and outside holes to actually cause the tracking mechanism to work. Just so you get a real first-hand idea, you know, of how big and how little the music rolls would actually have to move in order for the system to change state. I'm going to show you here is the comparative size of one small perforation on the music roll. I can do this effectively. I'll show you the comparative size of one small perforation on the music roll. I didn't plan this out very well. Okay, one small perforation on the music roll as compared to the size of those holes in the tracker bar. You can see that with as little of a change as approximately 1/5 the width of the hole of a hole in the music roll, the tracking mechanism will respond to that change. And I hope that clears it up. If you have any questions or want more information, there's going to be a link on the web page at player-care.com/tracker, TRACKER.html.